Welcome to Series 2, Episode 5 of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. Welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast with me, Catherine Morgan, founder of The Money Panel, helping you to get financially naked. Listen in each week where we talk about that taboo subject of money. Listen to brutally real-life stories, step into our guest shoes and be left feeling 100% confident and in control. Oh, and we hate financial jargon, so don't expect any here. Small steps, big wins, let's go. Hello, what's hello? Hello and welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to overcome the fear of investing. Now, I say that with a bit of an evil voice, but actually in reality, it's a big reality. For many of us, it's this fear of making the right decisions, choosing the right company to be investing with, that fear of making the wrong decision. And this particular podcast episode, I'm going to be talking to an expert called Neil Bage, and Neil is a behavioural finance expert. And behavioural finance is really about understanding what drives our emotions and how we make decisions. And it's a really, really interesting podcast. It's slightly longer than our normal episodes, so please bear with me through the episode. Maybe listen to this in two parts, but I can certainly guarantee you'll get a lot from this episode. Neil and I talk about some of the differences between how men and women behave with money. We talk about some behavioural biases. So one of the common ones that I experienced growing up around money was this kind of anchoring and the concept of anchoring. So you'll be able to understand what that means. And anchoring is, where you go into we talk about on the podcast, you go into John Lewis and you see that £300 beautiful summer dress on the hanger, and you are very pleasantly surprised to see a nice sale tag hanging off the hanger that says original price 300, sale price 120 or something like that. And you think that's a bargain, and you just grab it because you're anchoring your decisions on the original price at 300 and thinking you're getting a bargain. Now, I know for a fact that we have all subconsciously fell into this bias trap. Our retailers are very clever, and Neil actually gives us some other examples of how anchoring can work in how we make financial decisions. Now, the reason this is really important is because, going back to what we were talking about on some of the earlier podcasts, saving money ultimately is not going to grow your wealth in the long term. Saving loses you money because if it just sticks in cash and it's eroded by the inflation and all the cost of rises that we're seeing every single day at the moment, that's not going to grow your wealth. Investing is going to grow your wealth and give you the opportunity to have this concept of what we call financial freedom. That's what investing does. Investing it will enable you to do that. And it's about investing, it's smart. And often what stops us from investing are our feelings, our emotions, the fear of risk, the fear of losing money. And sometimes it just seems way too complicated. So we bury our heads in the sand and we don't take action. So behavioural finance will really help us to understand how we can avoid those emotionally driven decisions, which can lead potentially then to financial losses. So actually just understanding what these biases are will help us to be more conscious when we make decisions about money. Now, Neil is an award-winning fintech founder and entrepreneur of a company called Be-IQ Ltd, Be-IQ Ltd. And Neil's expertise is focusing on the specialists of the subconscious behaviours that drive our decisions, and an expert at bridging the kind of complex theory with the real world understanding. What I love about Neil is we talked in this podcast about how he started off wanting to be a PE teacher and how he started to learn more and more about the aspects of psychology and what drives our human decisions. And that's got him to where he is today as an award-winning, or in fact, multi-award-winning company founded in the UK. So without further ado, I welcome to the podcast Neil Bage. So a huge welcome to Neil. Neil, thank you so much for coming on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to having this conversation, Catherine.
Oh, me too. Neil and I we're going to be on tour together, aren't we, in June?
We are. Have you got we should have T-shirts made with all of the venues on the back. So we look like a proper gigging band.
Yeah, definitely. Neil and I are going on a speaker tour with a company called Nucleus in June. So we're literally city hopping between like London, Ireland, Scotland, Leeds, I think. I can't remember all the city names now, but over 6 days. So over 2 weeks, we've got 6 days. And I'm already kind of logistically thinking about I'm going to be flying from London over to Ireland and then from Ireland into London. And then it's just going to be absolutely mental, but I'm quite looking forward to it. It's going to be like being on tour with like a groupie.
Exactly. I mean, it's slightly different for me as well because I have an additional logistical nightmare because of where I live. So I live on the west side of the Isle of Wight. So I have to factor in getting a ferry off the island first before I can travel anywhere in the mainland. So, but you know what? The benefit of living here far outweighs the stresses of trying to get anywhere in the UK.
Oh, well, I'll think of you then when I have to get up probably like 3 hours later than you because I live in Milton Keynes, so not quite so hard to get to.
Not really.
Fabulous. Well, so Neil and I, we've known each other for a little while, but obviously we'll get to know each other really well when we go on tour. But Neil is a behavioural finance expert. And the reason that I've invited Neil on today is because I think it's really important to think about how our emotions and our behaviours drive our decisions. And particularly for women, one of the biggest reasons that stops us from investing is fear. And it's this concept of loss aversion, which we're going to talk about in the podcast today. It's this fear of loss. And, we all are very, very sensitive to, we want to make the best financial decisions because we don't want to make the wrong decisions. And that is very much an emotional bias. It's what emotions are going on behind that decision that make us feel like it's not going to be a good decision. And it's something that I really want to explore so that at the end of this podcast, you can feel confident that actually in reality, it's just because we're human and we do make decisions based on our emotions rather than sometimes our rational part of our brain. So behavioural finance really kind of deals with how we can avoid some of those emotionally driven decisions, which can lead potentially to losses, and how our beliefs drive whether we take action or not. And many of us believe that, we're making decisions rationally, but behavioural finance kind of says that this is true. And they believe that we fall into what we call these money traps because we don't understand the emotional biases that hold us back. So, Neil, I've got a really important question to ask you initially. But before I ask you my first question, could you just give us a little bit of an insight into how you became involved in becoming a behavioural finance expert and what was your journey?
Absolutely, I will. By the way, that your introduction then was spot on, and I might steal that for a presentation I'm doing. It was a really brilliantly succinct way of saying exactly what I talk about, the fact that emotions have such an impact on our financial decisions. But we'll come on to that in a second. So,
Great.
So I left school and wanted to be a PE teacher, and that was my planned destiny, I guess. And part of studying to be a PE teacher, I did two things which have had a profound impact on my life, and I still love these two things. One of them is human biology, so just how the body works. I've always had a fascination with physiology and human biology, and I still do to this day. But the other course that I studied was sports psychology. And it was the sports psychology element that really got me hooked on the power of the brain and how dominant it is in everything that we do. And, I use this example quite a lot. Think of a professional golfer who can putt a ball that's only literally a foot from the hole time and time and time and time and time again. But when there is a championship medal on the table, that 1 foot putt seems like a mile, and the hole seems to be like it's 2 millimeters wide.
Yeah.
And it's the tricks our brain play with us, and they miss the putt and they lose the championship. That psychology has always interested me. So kind of fast forward through the years, and I continue to study psychology, and I self-taught, and I read a lot of things. I did a lot of online courses. And then I kind of, probably, I reckon 10 years ago, fell into the the field, I guess, of just decision theory. So how people make decisions, and linking that into psychology just really opened my eyes. And I started to then think, well, hang on, what about, and at the time I was working for a financial services company. So I then started thinking, well, how do these decisions affect our money decisions? Are they the same, or is there differences? And the more I dug, the more I started to get absolutely fascinated by the whole idea of behavioural science, and in particular how our decisions impact our financial decisions, because those are the decisions that can have a significant impact on whether our futures are rosy and bright and enjoyable, or whether we have a future that is just fraught with agony and money worries. So that's kind of like a very short journey, if you like, over the last 20 odd years of where I've got to. And then latterly I used that knowledge that I have, and the skills that we've learned, to found a company called Behavioural IQ. And that's all about developing a proposition where we can allow any human being, I refer to this person as the man on the street, the normal person, to go through a series of kind of highly enjoyable and fun tests, but actually allow them to reveal the behaviors that are beneficial to them and those behaviors that could potentially harm their financial plans. So that's kind of where we've got to. Does that answer that question, Catherine?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I love how you've gone from wanting to be a PE teacher to the position you're in now. It's just, there's obviously a very logical path. I can see how that path has taken you from where you were to where you are now. But I love hearing about people's stories as to how they became involved in the financial services industry. I think it's often not necessarily a profession that we choose. It just kind of comes to us in some way.
I agree.
You mentioned in there about learning about how we make decisions. How do we make decisions?
Badly, typically, because we obviously don't do this on purpose, but we do it because there's two things, right? The first one is that as humans, we aren't evolutionarily wired to make difficult decisions, because that involves greater brain power, and the more brain power we use, the more physically tired we feel. So evolution has got us to a place where we try and avoid hard, difficult decisions as much as we possibly can. And your listeners will get this. If they, picture a time when they have had to sit and consciously think about something quite detailed, they will have experienced a physical brain pain. It is hard work to think hard. So we try and avoid it. Now, if we were to make decisions perfectly every single time, every decision we make, we would have to slow down. We would have to consider all of the alternatives. We would have to consider all of the facts before we reached a decision. And that would involve things like, would you like a cup of coffee or a cup of tea? We would go, well, I need to weigh up the pros and cons of both of them. I need to see what other drinks are available to me. We don't do that. We can't do that. So we just make quick, snap decisions. And to do this, we take what psychologists call, it's a heuristic, which is, in essence, it's a rule of thumb. It's a shortcut. We basically look at information and we just make a snap judgment to reach an answer, to make a decision. And it's when these decisions kind of don't really give us an optimal outcome that the biases that people have heard about, these cognitive biases, creep in and allow us to get somewhere which potentially could be suboptimal, maybe optimal, but generally is suboptimal. So we're not really wired to make good informed decisions purely because of our biology, ultimately.
That's really interesting. And I always think back about my journey with my relationship with money was very spontaneous, but also very emotional. So it wasn't until I got into my 30s that I began to think about actually that I wasn't really getting anything from that. Because I had this emotional relationship with money, I would just spend. And that didn't get me anything, because I was spending all my money typically in my 20s and my teens on clothes, because I wanted to have a better confidence with my body. I always felt that if I bought this new pair of jeans or this top, it would make me feel skinny and I would look better and feel more confident. And ultimately it didn't. And it wasn't until I kind of dug quite deep into looking at the reasons why I felt bad about myself in the first place that I then uncovered and thought, actually, I don't need to be spending my money on this. What the hell am I doing? because my relationship was automatically based on spontaneity and highly driven by emotion, because it was driven by the lack of confidence. I think this is a really common theme that I see when I'm working with clients, not necessarily related to emotional spending like I had in my 20s around clothes, but there's this big fear of what does this path look like? And because we don't naturally plan ahead and we plan out each of those steps to understand what does this look like financially, we get this fear of, oh my gosh, but I have no idea what that's going to look like. And there's this fear of it's either going to not look very good, and therefore we're going to beat ourselves over the head for not saving enough money in our 20s, or we have this fear that, oh, well, I don't even know how to begin this journey. How do I begin to map out these steps to have a bright financial future? So I think for me, that's really important to think about is, naturally as human beings, if we are behaving around money very spontaneously, and it may not be specifically related to money. It could be food, for example. Overspending on food is a really common one for a lot of people. But if we're not thinking about the conscious decisions, then that can impact on how we make decisions, right?
No, absolutely. And the problem that we have when it comes to really important decisions is we just don't have a tendency to slow down. And actually, there are some things, I don't know whether any of your listeners or you have heard, there's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by a guy called Daniel Kahneman. And he talks about the way that we make decisions, in essence, is in two ways: fast and slow. Those quick decisions are the cup of coffee or cup of tea. The slow decisions should be, what am I going to do about my financial future? Because I need to make a decision about my financial future. And his view is, and correctly, that you should slow down to make that decision. In other words, you should give it some more deeper, slower, conscious thought and effort. But the problem we have as humans is we tend to make most of our decisions quickly.
Quick and fast, yeah.
We kind of go, right, I need to save some money, right? I need an answer now. I don't want to sit and think about this. I don't want to ponder on data, on facts and figures. I just want to reach a decision quickly and get on with my life. And what people need to realize is that unless you slow down, unless you make an informed decision about something as crucial as your financial future, you are potentially building a financial plan on a foundation of sand.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that is that because as an industry, there is so much jargon around financial planning and money and investing and all of these topics that we're talking about, that I guess forces people further, to not just think quickly. They want quick decisions, but actually some of the information available to people is complicated and full of jargon, and therefore it makes it even harder for people to then make that decision.
That's right, and that's why you see, for example, there's a huge amount of procrastination in financial decision making. And you can see this by looking at HMRC's the details or the statistics of tax returns, or even just the amount of people who file their tax return at kind of 5 minutes to midnight, just before the deadline, is absolutely staggering. And that's not because people are lazy; it's because they have a million and one other things to do in their life. And actually, filing a tax return requires a bit of brain power and also an element of understanding the jargon that is being presented to us.
Yeah.
And those two things don't make for a good journey, difficult language and complex terminology with something that requires me to slow down and think.
Yeah,
it's not ideal.
Yeah, not at all. I hope you aren't reading all the HMRC tax reports and statistics.
I'm really not. I wrote a blog about procrastination a while back and how it impacts our financial decisions. And as part of that, I did a bit of research on tax year end tax filing deadlines, and it shocked me what I read. But other than that, trust me, I'm not spending all my time on their website.
Yeah, next time outsource that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, are there any differences then behaviourally between how men make decisions versus how women make decisions?
Of course there are. And I have to say that because I've got 4 sisters.
Oh, gosh.
4
you were
sisters
well looked after then.
And I'm the only boy, and I'm right in the middle. 2 older sisters, 2 younger sisters. So, yeah, very interesting life. And my dad worked away from home a lot of my life as well. So actually, I grew up with 4 girls and my mother.
Oh, really interesting.
It is. It actually, and I say this genuinely. I presented at a conference on diversity about a year ago, and I said the same thing there. I think it held me in good stead for life. It actually taught me some really valuable lessons about just getting on with people generally. And I'm glad I didn't have an awfully male influence in my life when I was younger. Actually, I'm glad I didn't have 4 brothers, for example. So it's fascinating. I learned a lot.
Men generally take more risks than women, right?
Correct.
So you are more risk averse then, are you? Because you grew up with sisters.
I am more risk averse. Now, I've never really thought whether that's one of the defining factors of my risk attitude or not. Potentially, maybe.
That's one of the questions on your risk questionnaire. Like, do you have brothers or sisters?
Yeah, what's your family makeup? It'll be quite interesting, wouldn't it, to see if there's any correlation between number of male to female siblings versus your risk attitude.
Oh, there's your next research paper.
I might write that down.
So sorry, what are the behavioural differences then between men and women?
So there's 3 that I can just think of just off the cuff, and they're more myths, I guess. So one of them is that there's a general view that women, when they're under pressure, especially financial pressure, become more emotional, and that's not true. There is kind of empirical research now that shows you that when women are under financial stress, they tend to slow down, and they tend to take much more of a broader view of all of the facts and figures in front of them and make a choice. Whereas men, when they are placed under pressure, they tend to become more laser focused. And there is biological reasons behind this, by the way, because it's all to do with heart rates and cortisol levels, and biologically, cortisol levels in men and women behave differently when we're placed under stressful situations. So what tends to happen is women tend to kind of weigh up the contingencies more, and actually become more interested in smaller rewards that they can count on, rather than what men typically tend to do is become so laser focused on the big reward that they do that at the detriment of these smaller, more guaranteed rewards, if you like. Does that make sense? So actually, I always say this to people: if you're making a big financial decision, you should try your hardest, if possible, to, especially within a family environment, to make those decisions with both male and female input.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Not independently of each other, because both males and females bring a strength that, when you combine it, should give you much more of an optimal outcome.
I love that, and it's another reason, I guess, to act more intentionally around money together as a couple. Because, and often I get questions quite a lot in my community on Facebook around, how can I have better conversations with my partner about money, because he just buries his head, he doesn't want to talk about it. Or sometimes he could be the emotional spender, and they want to get more intentional with money, and they find it very difficult because their partner doesn't want to have that conversation about money. And we often talk about tips, which I'll cover on a future podcast episode. It's too much to kind of cover in this session, but I think that's a really interesting point, that as a couple in a relationship, that you will bring different strengths to the party, to that relationship, whether that's because you've had a different financial past to each other. That we've just talked about the fact that if you grew up with sisters, for example, and you're perhaps a bit more cautious, that could be beneficial if one of you is perhaps more of a risk taker, and then maybe you use that and to have a kind of happy medium somewhere in the middle.
That's exactly the point. And the research is there that that shows what you just said is true. Women tend to think more holistically and take on less risk and are more patient. And when you think that men tend to be more laser focused and actually build risk and are more impatient, actually finding a happy balance between the two should, in theory, give you a better outcome.
So with this difference in mind then, between men being more prone to take bigger risks than women, what do you think are some of the biggest behavioural biases that prevent women from investing?
Confidence is one, and this is another very well researched area. In fact, Fidelity, the investment company in the US, carried out research looking at this a few years back, and the findings were staggering. And if I can find a link to that research, by the way, Catherine, I will send it to you, and you can maybe post it online, because it is a really interesting read, and it kind of shows you that when you ask So they researched 8 million investors. It was a big number they carried out this research of. And one of the questions was, how do you believe you're going to perform in your investment? And the amount of women who thought that they would outperform men was around 8-9%. So only 100 women thought that they would outperform men. Most women thought that they wouldn't outperform men. Yet when the evidence came in, they found that the vast majority of women outperformed men. So there's this kind of this underconfidence streak running through females compared to males, which is completely unfounded. And I stand up at conferences and talk to women a lot about this. And, it's about just having a belief in your skill, because there is a skill there. There are behavioral biases, I guess, that can be exploited for the good. And if you just have faith and the courage of your conviction, then actually you will absolutely set yourself on the path to success. But don't kind of succumb to this societal view that, that men are better investors than women, because that is just a load of tosh.
Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that there's research there to support that, because I think as women, we do lack confidence and we do lack conviction. And, this all ties into money mindset, right? It's all around our mindset and our belief systems around money. And our belief systems are often derived from what we think. So if we can think differently, we can behave differently, and we can act differently. That's the key thing for me. The whole reason I called this podcast In Her Financial Shoes was about stepping into your shoes and changing that emotion, that behavior, so that you can have, a clear plan with small steps of things that you can be doing to increase your confidence. I mean, I see this every day. I was coaching a client earlier this morning who has been through a divorce. She runs a very successful health business for herself. But at the moment, her income primarily is derived from two sources. One is from maintenance payments from her ex, because she's got children. And the other is from child benefit and tax credit. So she's building her business in the background. But her biggest fear is that when her son turns 18 next year, that child maintenance and benefit stops. And when we talked about that, she was saying that she's got to therefore find, I think it was £500 a month for maintenance to replace that benefit. And the fear for her was that she's spent so long relying on other people controlling money to think about her controlling that money for herself was really difficult. She found it, just very, very fearful to think about that. So I asked her, well, what are you doing in your business at the moment? She's just launched an online membership. She's just taken 53 people into her membership at £20 a month. So we worked out that if she was just to bring in another 20 odd people into her membership with her price increases that she's got coming up in the next 12 months, by the time her son reaches 18, she financially would be able to replace that £500. And it was like a magic light bulb moment. She was like, oh my gosh, that's easy. Like that's an easy target. I want to, she wanted to then talk about how she could have a much bigger target, a bigger challenge. But for her, it was just having that confidence to know that she is completely capable of making that decision and breaking that down into, like you were talking about earlier, not just run. Like, we're super women every day. We're doing this and we're doing that. We're trying to run a business and we're looking after kids and, we're doing all of these things, but actually breaking that down and thinking about what are we doing? What can we do that's completely in our control?
Yeah, and I find stories like that. There's elements of that story that I find quite sad. That there's an element of stereotypical the way that the world is. That men do one thing and women do another thing. Men go out to work and women stay at home. All of that rubbish. I was going to swear then. I nearly swore on your podcast. All of that really winds me up something chronic. It really does, because I just think it's such an old-fashioned way to look at the world. And if we want to have a much more just world where everybody just gets on and for the benefit of everybody else, then we should be doing things in a much more collaborative way. We should be, what I would call a cross-gender approach to life, where we make financial decisions, men and women make those decisions together. Not I'm the man, therefore I look after the woman. I look after the money, sorry. What's that all about? It's not like the 1920s anymore. Let's move on with stuff and let's look at what the skills are of both genders. And extrapolate those skills and put them together, because then you and your entire family unit benefit from that.
Yeah, 100. I couldn't agree with you more. My husband and I definitely live, not in a traditional sense at all. I mean, he does most of the cooking in the house. Yes, I do the school runs on most days, but he also does that too. We don't hold these traditional roles in our house. We never really have done from day one, to be honest. I think the first time I cooked for him, actually, it was a terrible disaster. This is a tip, actually. If you're in a new relationship and you don't like cooking, make a really bad meal early on in your relationship, and then he'll just want to cook for you because my husband likes food and wants to be fed. So I cooked this awful tuna pasta dish that just turned into it was a catastrophe.
Like that scene in Bridget Jones's Diary where she cooks with blue string.
Oh my gosh, it was worse than that. Anyway, coming back onto the topic of behavioural finance. So, So I guess the next question for me would be, how do you know what biases are affecting you personally? So if I'm sitting here listening to this podcast, how do I know what kind of biases are driving the decisions that I'm making?
Well, first of all, you can do some really quick kind of desk-based research. That sounds really grand. What I mean by that is go on Google and type in behavioural biases. And even if you read Wikipedia, you can get to understand what that means. Understanding what a behavioural bias is the first step. Then there must be thousands upon thousands of websites where you can start to read about some of the more pertinent behavioural biases, like framing, like anchoring, confirmation bias, overconfidence. So some of the more powerful biases you can read about very easily, and that makes you at least aware that these biases exist in yourself. But actually, Catherine, you raised a really interesting point, and important question: how do you test for your own biases? And the answer is, whilst there are ways that you can sit and do a 45-minute test online, there isn't really any way yet that we found of kind of doing that and just doing it, going through self-discovery in a way that is fun and engaging, and people can genuinely learn about themselves. And that, without even trying to promote what we're doing, is what Be-IQ is all about. It's about delivering those services, which we'll hopefully be doing in June, July, where any of your listeners can go through a series of games, learn about their biases, learn how strong or weak they are, and learn about where those behaviors are beneficial and where they could potentially creep in and have an impact on their financial plans. So it's all about self-awareness. But as a first step, just go online and just type in top 10 behavioral biases, and then read whichever article you find, because they're all pretty much of a muchness.
Yeah, it's one of the things I cover in my online investing course. So I've done some research around this already, and I've put together a series of mini videos for people to understand things like anchoring, for example. So if somebody... First of all, I describe what anchoring is, and then we talk about what challenges that can have for you when it comes to investing. So anchoring for me, just to give people an example of that, is let's say you walk into a John Lewis, and John Lewis, there's a lovely, beautiful summer dress on the rack that you've seen, and it's caught your eye, and you've picked it up, and you're delighted that it's got this sale tag on it. And the retail price was maybe, I don't know, £120, and it's reduced to 50 quid, and you think, brilliant, that's a bargain, like it's 50 quid. So where anchoring comes in is where you've anchored yourself already on the original price. So you're thinking that you've got a really good bargain because it was originally £120. So you think it's a bargain, therefore you purchase it. And that's just a really easy example of what anchoring is and how retailers use that to get you to buy more.
I'll tell you, let me tell you a way that they can exploit that even further.
Oh gosh, I bet I know all the tricks. Go on.
So you are absolutely right. So I go in, there's a suit that says what was £2,000, now 600. And I go, oh my God, it's only £600. And you're right, you anchor yourself to that 2,000 price tag, that initial price tag. But where they also exploit us behaviorally is that retailers know that one thing that humans are terrible at is understanding probabilities and percentages. Right? We're not very good at doing the maths. So what they do is they can say, instead of saying was £2,000 now £600, they can just whack a label on there saying 70% off. And we anchor ourselves to that more than the monetary amount, because we can't compute what that means. We see 70%, and we know that that's a big figure. It only goes up to 100%. So I'm going, wow, that's 70% off. That's what a bargain, without ever realizing what the numbers are that sit behind it. So anchoring is really powerful. It's a really powerful behavior.
Well, that's interesting as well, I guess, from how we sell how we sell our services, or how we promote offers. Yeah. So a percentage is that sort of proven to be better than using the actual pounds?
No, what I mean is percentages tend to make people not understand.
Right. Okay.
So we're not very, as a rule of thumb, we're not very good at maths. We're fine with mental arithmetic when we're handing over our £5 to buy something and we know what change to expect, but we're not very good at what's called multi-step logic, where we have to do several things at the same time, sequentially to get to an answer. We're not very good at that, and I can prove this actually right now. This is a really easy way to prove how bad we are at maths. And when I said at the very beginning about our inability to think hard, it's those two things put together. So if I said to all of your listeners, and they can play along with this, what is 2 plus 2? Right now, I can talk immediately, because what happens is you don't even need to do the maths, because it's such an easy sum that the answer immediately comes to your mind. It's easy. 2 plus 2 equals 4. We know that already.
Yeah.
Right. Then if I said this, what is 55 plus 79?
Yeah.
Now, they can do the maths, and it'll take a little bit longer, with some people more so, but that takes a little bit longer than 2 plus 2. If I then said, what is 35,612 plus 72,905?
Yeah.
Most people now, I would expect, are completely lost.
They've just pressed pause on the podcast now.
and it's not because there's two things. One, doing that type of maths involves brain power, but two, it requires you to hold in your head
a number of
two
figures.
5-digit numbers, and we're not very good at doing that. So imagine then if that flips on its head and it says this was £365, but there's 65% off. People don't do the maths on that. They just go, 65 is a big number. It must be a bargain. I'll have one. Thank you very much. So retailers exploit these kind of, I want to say weaknesses, but they're not weaknesses. These opportunities in our brains that they know, anchor them to a price, but let's use percentages, because that will just blow their mind.
There you go. So next time you walk into John Lewis and see that sum address, you'll know that you're being, this is anchoring that's happening right there and then.
And what they also do, so I'm going to go off on one here, what they also do is another bias of framing, which I mentioned, they also can frame it by putting a big sign above it saying, the most popular dress this summer. Framing you into the socially conditioning your brain to think, well, if that's the most popular one, and I don't want to be the one on the outside of the crowd, so it's framed in a positive light. They anchor you to a price, and they present it in a kind of a salient way, so it stands out from everything else. All of these little biases that they exploit in order for you to part with your hard-earned cash.
Very clever. Oh gosh, I'm sure I fell into all of those traps. I used to spend all my money on clothes. Goodness.
But Catherine, do you know what's really important here to say this is, even when you know all of these things exist, as I do, as other behavioural guys do, right? We still fall for it. I still fall for this. I still go to shops and see something. I bought a pair of Bose headphones, a replacement pair recently, and they were on a special offer, and I looked at and I fell for the special offer, because actually overriding all of that was the fact that I wanted a pair of Bose headphones.
Yeah, it's the want versus need, isn't it?
that was the pull. And I know I've been sold to here. I know I am.
And I think to say that, like, we are all human. We all, we all have good intentions, and sometimes we fall short of those intentions, and sometimes we don't. And I think So one of the things that I would say is if you know that you're an emotional spender like I was, is then it's about what can you do to behave differently? What can you do differently?
Yes.
So one of the things I very often talk about is about this 48-hour rule. Have you heard of this, Neil, with shopping?
I'm assuming it's a kind of a commitment device idea of putting a rule in place to stop you doing something. I'm guessing.
It's basically, and someone needs to build an app for this. I don't know I think there is one that exists in America actually, but I've not been able to use it in the UK. But it's like a plugin that you can plug into Amazon. I don't think Amazon would like it, but you can plug it into Amazon so that you know when you get that moment where you just think, oh, I need this, and you go onto Amazon and you just order it, and you don't necessarily shop around because you can't be bothered and you haven't got the time. But I'm sure most of us make spontaneous decisions with Amazon every single week. But what the 48-hour rule is that you leave it in your shopping basket for 48 hours, and obviously I'm talking to the wrong person here, really, but I'm sure you'll be able to give me all the research around this. But it's about allowing your brain to react more rationally than emotionally. So if you're feeling really emotional because you've had a crap day at work, or your kids are stressing you out, or whatever reason is driving you to that decision, first of all, it's by identifying what is the emotion that's driving that decision. What is the feeling attached to that? And then if you introduce this kind of cooling off period, it enables your brain to then think, actually, do I really need this? And then 2 days later, if you go back to your shopping basket, and you can then still justify the fact that you need to purchase this second pair of headphones that you've already got and don't really need, then that can just allow your brain to think more rationally. And it's worked really well for me.
Great idea.
Over the last.
Well, it's a great idea. And this like I use that phrase, commitment device, and a commitment device is something in essence that you put in place to allow you to behave in a different way. So that could be, if you're a smoker, giving somebody your cigarette and having to ask them permission to have a cigarette. That's a commitment device, and that's what this is. And I'm seeing a kind of an increase in these type of apps coming to the market that are trying to automate certain behaviors that people know are really powerful, like what you just said. We all have Amazon. I've got Amazon app on my iPhone, and I sit down watching TV and see something, think, oh, I could do with buying a new one of them, and you click on it, and you click, instant buy, done. Next day it arrives, and you think, what did I need this for again?
So add it on your wish list instead.
And that's what you should do. So all of these things that allow us to just reflect, to use a phrase I've already mentioned, to slow down. And to think, is this right for me?
But also giving yourself permission to have that treat. So one of the big fears that I come across for women is that they often, if they come up very high as a giver with their relationship with money. So I do an exercise with clients when I first start working with somebody around their relationship with money. And if they come out quite, as a high giver, for example, they can often feel very guilty of spending money on themselves. And they find it very difficult to spend money on themselves. And so sometimes giving yourself permission by allocating a proportion of money that you earn every month to a treat pot, and then allowing yourself to purchase something for yourself, I think is really important. Because not everybody is spontaneous with money. Some people are the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
No, I agree. And there's a whole raft of behaviors we could talk about here, but one that just springs to mind, and actually this goes back to something you said about 10 minutes ago about you when you were younger wanting to buying clothes and things like that. There's the behavior of kind of present bias, if you like. So present bias is, it's really easy to describe if I asked you a question. Would you rather have £20 right now, or would you rather have £30 in a week? And what happens is everybody who's listening to this will have answered that question already, because one of those will have just felt right. And if they said, I'll have the £20 now, I could then say, okay, instead of 30, what about 40? What about 50? What about 60? And at some point along that journey, I can delay their immediate gratification for the bigger future-based reward. That's what, in essence, that's present bias. And the thing is with us is present bias is also quite a dominant force in us. We are locked in this perpetual battle between our present selves and our future selves, and our future self wins most of the fights. It's why when you feel a bit stressed, you're a little bit emotional, and that you're trying to lose weight and you're on a health kick, but you're a little bit hacked off for something today, and somebody says, do you want this Krispy Kreme donut? You snatch it out of their hands and shove it into your mouth, because that present self, everything that is wrapped up in that present self becomes the dominant force. And actually, this is true with money. So if we have money, if we have disposable income especially, and we could be saving for our future self is screaming at us, yes, put it into your pension, or save it into an ISA, or do this or do that. But our present self is saying, but I need a new set of Bose headphones. And this future self and present self battle is pretty hard, actually. It's a really difficult fight that goes on. So, and I say this to people all the time, we shouldn't punish our future self for winning some of those fights, but we also need to be very aware that our present self, we should be aware that our future self has a valid point as well. And we need to try and strike a happy balance between the two and try and find as much a balance between what we want right now and what our heart and our emotions is telling us we want now, but against our future self who's saying, please prepare for me. Please allow me to have a good life. So it's a difficult fight. And I'm not suggesting to anybody listening to this that the answers are easy, but at least being aware that these things are going on is a good start.
And leading from that then, so if somebody has been listening to the series 2 on the podcast is all about giving you the confidence to invest in the stock market. And so this is where we can relate this kind of future self. It's about rewarding our future self by investing for the future. And we've busted quite a few myths already so far on the podcast about how, investing isn't just for the wealthy. Investing is achievable for people even with just £1. And you spoke earlier about all these apps that are coming onto the market that enable people to invest with very low levels of commitments. And so it's 100% possible to be able to do that. And if you haven't listened to the previous podcast episodes in this series around some of those myths, then go back and listen to those before you carry on with this one. But knowing that that's possible, knowing that, there are easy ways for you to automate those investing habits, what about this bias of what we call like herd mentality bias? So where maybe the stock market is a little bit volatile right now, and we've got Brexit going on still, and we've got potential interest rate rises coming, and all of these factors economically, what kind of biases come into play in these kind of situations?
Several. I mean, gosh, Brexit is a
Let's
classic
not talk about
one.
Brexit.
I was asked on a podcast recently about it, and I said, I raised the subject actually, but only to illustrate the behavioural bias that has just become so dominant within the Brexit discussion. But there are, the biases that you or the areas you mentioned, there are different biases creeping all the time. But herding is actually quite a powerful one, and it's more of a social bias actually, because what we as humans don't want to do is we don't want to be the one on the outside of the crowd. Ideally, we don't like it. It feels a little bit uncomfortable to be the one on the outside. So if everybody is doing something and you're the only one who isn't, that feels pretty uncomfortable and takes a great deal of courage to do that. And again, evolution has played its hand in that, because we have evolved to be creatures of a herd. We're not solitary people as a species. Sorry, we're not solitary. We always, even just living in a street with other human beings around us, you might never come out of your house that often, but we still live in an environment where we are part of a herd. We're part of a crowd. But the problem with herding, of course, is what happens is you speak to your friends and they say, oh, I come out the stock market, I moved all my money into cash. And then another friend says, oh, I moved all my money into cash. And then another friend says, I moved my money into cash. And you start thinking, well, am I the only one who's left in the market? And then you start asking yourself questions. Do they know something I don't know? What have they found out that I haven't found out? And then what you do is, even if you, as their advisor, saying, leave well alone, what happens is they look at all of their friends doing the opposite, and we have a belief that they know something that other people don't know, and we tend to fluctuate towards the crowd, towards the herd, and we tend to do what the herd does. And it's that phrase, Catherine, safety in numbers. if the big numbers are doing it, then I'd rather be in amongst them than just being the one on the outside. That is the one who's sat looking at everybody else doing this stuff. But there's a great bit of video on, I think it's on YouTube, of this proves the power of herding, right? Darren Brown, the kind of TV psychologist, magician guy, does this. He sends a guy into a room and there's 10 chairs. Guy goes into a room on his own, sits down, and every minute a bell rings and he looks around and he has no idea what this bell means. Then a second person comes in, and this second person is in on what's going on. And every time the bell rings, this person stands up and then immediately sits down. Bell rings, stands up, sits down. Then another person comes in who is also in on it, and every time the bell rings, stands up and sits down. Then the third person, exactly the same. So now the first guy is the only guy who isn't in on this. But three other people, every time they hear the bell, stand up and sit down immediately. By the time the fourth person is in the room, the first guy starts to mimic the behavior. He has no idea why he's doing it, but now every time the bell rings, he stands up and he sits down, because that's what the crowd are doing, right? Then all 10 chairs fill up. And what happens is the original people who were in on this joke, if you like, leave the room and only leave behind the people who were absolutely unaware of the experiment. And yet, every time the bell rings, they all still stand up and sit down. And that learned herd mentality behavior is absolutely telling, that we hate being on the outside. And what he didn't want to do is he didn't want to be the only one sat down. Because now he's thinking, well, do they know something I don't know? They must know something. They must have been told something that I haven't. Therefore, I should just do what they are doing so that I'm not the only one not doing it. And herd mentality is quite a powerful behavior as well. That especially to do with money, we should just look at the facts, look at the evidence, listen to experts, and make
really
decisions
interesting.
on that.
And it goes back as well to the conversations I have with people about what relationship they had with money growing up, because often as a child, we learn from, we do what others do around us, because it's all learned habits, all learned behaviors. So if what our parents are doing with money is burying their heads in the sand and not talking about money, then that's what we learn as kids, that we don't talk about money. And then we maybe think about, well, why don't we talk about money? We don't talk about it because it's only for people who are greedy with money, or, your mum always says money doesn't grow on trees. And so we learn all these messages, and actually just to even think about and write down what were those messages is a really powerful exercise to do, to think about.
Yes, that's right. And we should question that. We should question things like that, Catherine. We should always say, well, why wasn't I allowed to talk about money? Why did my parents bury their head in the sand when it came to things like this? And as adults, we should have that the ability and the freedom to explore those things. Else, we are falling for confirmation bias, which is another bias where we just seek out evidence that supports our existing beliefs. So we should always stop and go, well, hang on, why is that? Because there's always two sides to a story. And unless you understand both sides, you're not making an informed choice.
It's this common one, isn't it? Of, my dad told me not to invest in this because he had an endowment 30, 40 years ago that didn't do very well, and therefore investing is bad. And this confirmation bias that we've heard that from somebody, so it must be right, or we've read about it in a newspaper article, so it must be right. And we look for words. It's looking at, thinking about, I guess, just thinking differently, isn't it? Just being conscious about how we learn, how do we take in information, how do we learn information, and making the commitment to yourself to take the time to invest in, as you've done as well, Neil, in investing in learning about areas that are going to move you forward, in whether it's in your career, whether it's in your family life, whether it's in your professional life, with money in particular. So just to finish this off then, Neil, because I think we could talk for hours about this subject. It's such a fascinating topic. And I'm sure we'll cover this again in another episode to expand on this. But one of the articles that you wrote that really fascinated me was an article that you wrote called "Financial Education Isn't the Silver Bullet." And, for a lot of people, we feel that more financial education is needed, and I definitely agree with that. I think more financial education is definitely needed, hence why I do what I do. But you wrote quite I'm not sure if controversial is the right word, but you wrote, a contrarian view, I guess, on why why doesn't good financial education automatically lead to making good financial decisions? And I just wanted you to talk us through what your thoughts were around that.
So it wasn't meant to be controversial, by the way, but it turned out I seemingly prodded a few of the wrong people, which was never my intent. But so there's a view in the financial services industry that all of our woes and ills will be gotten rid of by bringing into the national curriculum a full-blown financial education program. And I disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. There are many subjects that we learn at school where a great deal of effort is placed on teaching us and making sure that we're learning the subjects that are taught that we never apply in life, even though we know them, even though we've learned them, we never apply them. And I believe that finance is one of those subjects. We don't deal with financial decisions on the scale that advisors deal with on a daily basis. I haven't dealt with an ISA today. I haven't dealt with my pension today. But when I do need to deal with them, I should be able to have at least a base knowledge to make that decision. In other words, the knowledge that I've gained, I need to know when and how to apply that knowledge. And the assumption, I believe, amongst people who proclaim that financial education is the silver bullet, is that by merely educating people, they will know when and how to apply that knowledge. And I think that is absolutely wrong. I think having knowledge in your head and knowing when and how to apply it are two completely separate things. Now, there is a caveat to this. I'm not anti-educating people about crucial financial things like compound interest, like the benefit and the power of savings and retirement planning. I'm not anti giving them an education that at least raises an awareness of the importance of these things. But teaching them kind of in-depth financial transaction or terminology or, just the way that people talk about it in this industry, that we need to give people almost like an A-level quality financial education, I think is not where we should be wasting I think it's wasted effort.
Because too much knowledge can be dangerous too, right? And too little knowledge can be dangerous.
Of course it can.
So it's not just about knowledge.
Of course it can. And there's a great bias, cognitive bias, called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and created by two guys, Justin Kruger and David Dunning. And what they found was, it's best summed up as a little knowledge is dangerous. And what they found was that what the Dunning-Kruger effect is if you know a little bit of information, your belief in your skill increases quicker than the information you have or the background you have to be skilled at that subject. So you, for example, you may learn something over the course of a 2-week course, but you now believe that your skill in that subject is far greater because you've got a little bit of knowledge. And actually, in order to know how little you really do know about that subject, you need to be an expert. And the problem with financial education, I feel, is we will give people a little bit of information that they will think is useful, but it will make them feel as if they have full-blown financial capability to make complex financial decisions. And that may see them jumping into things like cryptocurrency. It might see them, buying into investments that say, 8% return over the next 12 months, because they believe that they know what they're doing. And the reality is they actually, the decisions they're making is based off limited financial capability, but exacerbated by a belief that they have greater skills than they actually do. So I think that's why the title of that blog I wrote, Financial Education Isn't the Silver Bullet, was the right title to use. There are things we can do, and there are interactions we can have with people that will allow them to make better financial decisions. But I don't think that educating our children is the sole answer to solve all of the problems of the financial services industry.
So what would be the silver bullet for you? If you were to paint this picture of an ideal scenario, what would that look like?
I think the industry that we operate in needs to simplify itself in terms of how we interact with people. That would be a big first step. We often, the financial services industry has a habit of pointing the finger at the consumer as if it's their fault that people aren't saving. whereas actually we just make it incredibly difficult for people to interact with us as an industry. So if I had a magic wand, my first wish from waving my magic wand would be to simplify the terrible, terrible jargon and language we use in this industry, which includes, by the way, changing the tax system, which drives a lot of these problems. So that would be my first one. And I think I would make the interactions that people have with us as an industry more engaging and more enjoyable. I mean, I'm saying this is potentially controversial. I'm happy to be kicked in the shins for saying this. But I think as an industry, the way consumers interact with us is so dull. It is so mundane and so boring and so kind of, it's almost like it's a chore.
Yeah.
I have to do this. I have to do this is significantly different to I want to do this. It's completely different. It creates a different psychological mindset to start with. And as an industry, people say, oh, well, I better go online and do my annual ISA allowance. I mean, just saying that makes you want to poke your eyes out. And then they go online, and then the first thing is, oh, we need you to fill in this 20-question risk questionnaire. And they go, oh, okay, I'll fill that in. And then it's right now what we need to do is we need you to fill in these 30 questions about your financial capability or whatever it is. And by the time, literally 10 minutes in, they're thinking, what the hell am I doing? And you've got kids screaming at you, or you've got your husband or your wife saying, come on, we need to leave. We're going out now. And you've got things on TV that you want to watch. And then you've got this thing that's not only you feel like you have to do, but actually is sucking the lifeblood out of you because it is so dull. So my two wishes were, one, we as an industry, we learn how to interact with people in a language that they understand. And the second thing is the way we interact with them is we make it more engaging in real life. Yeah. Because at the moment, neither of those two things are there. And then financial education doesn't actually become the dominant subject matter anymore. It becomes, how do we kind of create this trinity of simplifying the industry, engaging with people on terms that they understand, and helping them, giving them the tools and the skills they need just to make important decisions.
Yeah, honestly, I couldn't agree with you more. That I did a Morningstar presentation this week, and literally on one of my final slides, it was exactly that. It was like, we need to simplify the jargon. We need to be connecting with people emotionally about money. So not ignoring the emotion that people feel about money, talking about it openly, understanding, our financial past, and not, not in a kind of, I talked about this in the Morningstar conference, not in a therapist way, but just thinking about what relationship, where have we come from before we know where we're heading. And as an industry, we don't talk enough about it. We just, it's very focused on jargon. And that's part of my big mission and purpose with what I'm trying to create, is not only somewhere where people can come and understand money in a simple language, but also so that we can start to create some real financial change in the markets about, how as a profession, we can take some responsibility to help people make better decisions by reducing the jargon. As you quite rightly said there, I couldn't agree with you more, building better ways for people to interact and engage with money. Without meaning to sort of blow my own trumpet here, with the clients that I'm working with, everything's done on video. It's all done in small steps. We talk through people's financial past, their financial present, their financial future. It's really engaging. They've got me by their side as their accountability partner, as their, they can talk about things without feeling judged. And that's what people want. They just want to have an open and honest conversation about money without necessarily walking into a room and being sold a product that they don't really understand anyway, and don't have any idea what this actually really means for them and their financial future. So I couldn't agree.
Absolutely. And the key thing that you're doing, which is admirable, by the way, is exactly that. It's about having proper conversations with people, but interacting with them in a way that they understand and that isn't alien or unique to financial services. Video conferencing with people, they do it all the time. Text messaging, WhatsApp messages. This is how people live their lives. Yet as an industry, we say, oh no, we can't do that. We have to write them a letter and send it to them in the post. And you think, what are you on?
And a 30-page suitability letter that has to explain why we recommended what we recommended.
And after literally either line one or at best paragraph one it gets kind of thrown in the bottom drawer because it's dull.
Yeah, and the good
I don't envy it.
And the good financial planning I was chatting to one actually at the conference. A good financial planning organisation that's thought about this kind of thing and this kind of challenge is, they'll provide a 1-page summary for the client, and the rest of it is full of a lot of jargon. I mean, some of it is important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not kind of throwing to aside the importance of suitability reports. And for those of you who have probably zoned off by this point, suitability reports are needed because we need to demonstrate the suitability of our advice in the in the regulated side as a financial planner. But the good financial planning firms out there, are very attuned to this, and they will produce a 1-page report for you so that you've got a clear summary, and the rest of it, you can kind of relate back to if you need to, kind of thing.
Exactly.
But oh gosh, we could literally talk about this for hours. But I just want to finish off, Neil, from your perspective. You have mentioned already a book that I'll put a link to in the show notes. But are there any other books that you would recommend that have either changed your life or had an influence on how you make decisions, or any particular book recommendations that you want to leave the listeners with today?
You know what? I was asked this question on a podcast about in November. And the answer, the question was, have you read a book that has changed your life? And I said, never. I've never read any book that has changed my life or had an impact on my life. I read lots of books and I find them all interesting, but nothing's had a really significant impact on me. Then I was given a book at Christmas that changed my life. It was on about serendipity. The book was by a guy called Matthew Walker, and the book is called Why We Sleep. And seriously, changed my life. I've changed several things in the way that I live my life as a result of that book. And it's basically, as the book title suggests, it's all about why we sleep and why the body needs sleep, why it needs rest, and what things like caffeine, lack of exercise, bad diet, smoking, drinking alcohol, not sleeping enough, looking at your computer screens, looking at your iPhone screens, what all of these things are doing to our physiology and our psychology, and how it impacts on sleep, and how a lack of sleep can have a significant detrimental impact on every single functioning part of our body. And I was halfway through it, and I turned to my wife and I went, and I used to drink a lot of coffee, and I said, right, I'm cutting down on coffee and I'm going to start drinking hot water. I'm also going to do the one thing in this book that he suggests, and his suggestion is you should give yourself the best chance at 8 hours sleep. He doesn't say you should give yourself 8 hours sleep. He says you should give yourself the best chance. And I absolutely wasn't doing that. So now I go to bed earlier, pretty much religiously. And I try and factor in the fact that I might toss and turn for a little bit, but actually I try and give myself the best chance at 8 hours sleep. I also started to do very gentle exercise. I didn't go back to a gym. I started to swim, and I'm not swimming anything like a competitive swimmer. I just swim gently and just do a little bit of exercise, but I do it every second day. And it has absolutely changed my entire it's cleared my mind. I feel better. I feel healthier. I think clearer. And I'd look at the book and I just think, gold dust, this book.
Amazing. Well, I've just looked it up on Amazon. It's got 40% off. God, I'm already been drawn into this bias, aren't I? $9.99 to $5.99, 40% off.
There you go. It's really good. And I also downloaded the Audible version of it. Just so I can listen to, because I find the way that
While you try to sleep.
when I'm on the train, I tend to, because I read the book, and then when I listened to it, I picked up things that I didn't remember reading. So just the way that double whammy of information, I think, is really interesting.
Yeah,
but
fabulous.
Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker, great book.
Cool, great. I'll pop a link to that in the show notes. And what about your favourite app on your phone right now?
My favourite app, I've got, and I have to tell you, it's a financial app. Can you believe I'm even saying this? Right?
Didn't expect anything else.
The financial, and it's called, I've used it for about a year now, and it's called Get Chip. GETCHIP, Get Chip. Okay. Now, Get Chip is, in essence, a commitment device. And what it does is it links itself to your bank account. And what it does is, on a daily basis, its algorithms, its little computer programs, go into your bank account and do a quick analysis of your income and expenditure on a daily basis. And then every 2 weeks, it takes a small amount of your bank account and deposit it in a deposit account. It chips away at your bank account.
Yeah.
And you get a message saying, congratulations, Neil. You've saved £33.16 today. It's always a random figure, by the way. Or, congratulations, you've saved £73 today. Congratulations, you've saved £15 today. That type of thing. And it puts it in a bank account, and the app is intuitive. It's easy to use. And then all of a sudden, one day you sit and think, I wonder how much money I've got in chip. And you click on the app and you realise you've got £900 sat there.
Yeah, it's really clever, isn't it? I use a similar one called Plum.
Yeah, it's a similar thing.
I've chip in the pot. Yeah, it works very, very similarly. Yeah, it's a great way of automating that savings habit.
It's brilliant, but that's not that I love about it. But what I love about it is the fact that they have the most intuitive chatbot. And I'm not sure whether your listeners know what that is. In essence, it's an automated conversation, but it understands what I'm asking it. Yeah, it's not a human responding, it's a computer responding. And it's got the most incredible chatbot system that sits behind it. So you can, in essence, have a conversation with it, and it responds to you, but cleverly in a way that gives you feedback that makes you go, oh, maybe I won't take the money out then. Or maybe I should leave it. You know, it's a really clever way of saying, let's chip away and save money, but at the same time, I'm going to try and kind of influence your decisions so that you don't just keep taking it back out. So great little app. Really great little app.
Great. I will pop. I don't think anyone else has mentioned Chip before, so I'll pop a link to that in the show notes as well. Cool. And finally, favorite Netflix series right now?
I am a stupidly avid Netflix watcher. I love Netflix. I'm looking forward to Stranger Things coming up in a few weeks.
Oh yeah, was this the second or third series?
Third, series 3. Yeah.
So, yeah, they're brilliant. I like
brilliant.
That one too.
But it's not. My current watch isn't on Netflix. It's on Amazon Prime, and it's called Life in Pieces. And it's a new series. It's a comedy series. Each episode's about 20 minutes. And I don't know whether you've heard of Modern Family. It's kind of similar concept to Modern Family. It's basically a big family, and each episode is 4 separate stories, 4 members of the family, each one about 5 minutes long. It is rib-splitting funny. It is absolutely hilarious. And it's after all the stresses and strains of a day at work, it's brilliant light relief.
So you're going to be watching that with your Amazon app open.
Whilst doing
trying to get your 8 hours sleep.
Exactly. So many things to do. So many things to cram into a day now. That's the problem.
Oh, I know. It's a busy life we lead, isn't it? But no, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. And it's been such an insightful podcast episode. It's a little bit longer than we would normally do, but I think, I've certainly gained a lot from listening to you, Neil, and I think it's a fascinating subject. So I hope that for you listening today, you've got a lot out of that. And Neil, for anybody who wants to follow, you mentioned earlier about Be-IQ launching something later on this year for consumers. Where can they find your details?
It's probably easiest to just look on the website, which is beiq.com, and that's spelled BEIQ.com. But actually, if they're on Twitter, I'm not really on social media, but I am on Twitter. And if they want to follow me on Twitter, and I'll be talking about it at the time, it's quite simply at Neil Bage, NeilBage.
Fabulous. Wonderful. That's great. Thank you so much. And Neil, I look forward to seeing you in June, ready for our speaker event.
Likewise. Can't wait.
Thanks so much for listening to the show today. As always, if you have any feedback for me, or there's any particular topics or questions that you would love us to tackle on the podcast, please feel free to get in touch. You can do that by sending me an email at hello@themoneypanel.co.uk, or you can come and find me on Twitter, The Money Panel, Facebook, or anywhere that you see me, basically. But we do love, it's great to get your feedback. So do let us know how you're finding the podcast. If you're enjoying listening to the show, then leave us a review. I would be very, very grateful for a 5-star review on iTunes. The reason it is not to necessarily massage my ego, but it's just to get iTunes and Spotify and the likes to actually pushing it out to more people. And that really helps me to serve my overall purpose of creating confidence for women to think and behave differently around money. And the other thing just to mention on this show is that if you do want some more support and you feel that now is the right time to be investing in boosting your knowledge, financial education around this topic of investing, then we do have the online course available to purchase. And the online course will really help you to dive a little bit deeper into some of these topics at your own pace, fully supported by me within a private Facebook community to get you started on your road to becoming a wealthy, savvy investor. As a podcast listener, you also get a cheeky little discount on that too. So I've put all the details to that in the show notes and also in the blog. Thanks very much for listening, and we will catch you again next Monday.